Um, my name is Claire Lewis, and I'm the Florida Friendly Community Statewide Coordinator. Today's webinar is Palm Nutrition, brought to you by Dr. Kimberly Moore. And before we get started today, I'd like to remind you to fill out the exit survey before you leave. This helps guide our future programming. And we'll continue to hold this webinar series on the second Tuesday of the month for the rest of the year. Our next webinar is New Turf Varieties. It'll be held April 13th at 10 a.m. with Dr. Kevin Kenworthy. It's approved for one landscape architecture CEU and a number of others. Let's see, I will list those in just a minute. This course has been approved for one CEU through ISA, FNGLA, LAIF, DBPR for landscape architects, and FDAX categories for limited urban fertilizer, limited commercial landscape maintenance, limited lawn and ornamental, commercial lawn and ornamental turf and pest control. Your microphones have been muted. Please type your questions into the Q&A box or into the chat box, and we'll take questions at the end of the webinar. If you would like CEUs for this webinar, I'll put the link in the chat box where you can make the $10 payment to receive the CEU credit. I'll need your license number and your name to make sure that you get the credit for your CEU. You can also visit our website to see the webinar schedule and approved CEUs. And with that, I would like to turn the screen over to Tom Wickman to introduce today's speaker.
Claire, thank you so much. My name is Tom Wickman. I'm the statewide coordinator for the Green Industries Best Management Practices Program, all as part of Florida Friendly Landscaping. And it's my pleasure to be able to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Kim Moore. Dr. Moore works in the area of sustainable horticulture and concentrates on sustainable nutrient management solutions for greenhouse crops. She investigates the use of alternative growing substrates like compost and alternative water sources like reclaimed water to grow containerized ornamental plants. She currently teaches elementary organic and biological chemistry and nutritional management of nursery crops, in addition to advanced nutritional management. She is the director of the Environmental Horticulture Management Undergraduate Certificate and chairs the Environmental Horticulture Department Academic Programs Committee. She's a busy lady. Claire and I certainly understand the fact that palms have special nutritional needs, and we felt strongly that we should provide some information to you about this topic. Dr. Moore answered our call to provide this presentation so that you can have the latest information about how to help keep palms healthy for your clients. Without any further delay, it's my pleasure to turn the floor over to Dr. Kim Moore. Kim, thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for being here. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and share my presentation with you. All right, so hopefully you see this lovely picture. And so I was telling Tom and Emily and Claire before everyone logged in is that I had this really bad habit. I see nutrient deficiencies everywhere. So what happened, I was sitting in line at Starbucks over the weekend with my mother. We were getting our lattes after church, and I go, Mom, lean out the window and get a picture of that palm tree. She goes, what? I said, I need a picture of that palm tree for the palm class that I'm doing. She goes, what? I said, just take my phone, take a picture. And so I see nutrient deficiency everywhere. And I'm sure all you have to do is go outside and look at a palm tree, and you'll probably see the same things that I see, these yellowing leaves on our palm trees everywhere. And I'm going to put a little caveat here. I'm not necessarily a palm expert, but I am a plant nutrition expert. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you things that I know about plant nutrition and why we see certain nutrient deficiencies, the nutritional background on all of that. So that's what I want to talk about is why do we see these things in our landscape everywhere? Why do we see yellowing fronds and brown tips and little brown spots? What does this mean, and why do we see this? So there are a variety of palm trees in our landscape, and there are a variety of ornamentals in our landscape, but we're going to focus on palms. But I want to explain the science behind why you're always going to see these types of issues regardless of what we're doing. So we're going to get the fertilizers, but I want to explain why we see these nutrient problems over and over and over again. And I've been here since I moved to Florida in 1995, and I continue to see the same things over and over again when I'm looking at palms. So we're going to do a little chemistry review. So we're going to go back to our high school chemistry class, and I promise, because it's early in the morning on a Tuesday morning, that I'm not going to make this a painless chemistry review. But if we remember chemistry, we probably have flashbacks to the periodic table, and it's probably, depending on if you liked chemistry or not, it might be a painful memory flashing back to the periodic table. But the periodic table is the elements that are available in the environment. So they've sorted them based on their size and how they react. So we have the periodic table. The elements on that periodic table are ions. So most of the elements on the periodic table you won't find them as like pure potassium. They're going to be showing up in the environment as either positive or negative ions. So in order to understand that, remember your general chemistry is that in the middle of an atom, we have the nucleus. The nucleus has the protons and the neutrons. It's kind of the center core. And orbiting the outside of the atom or the core are the electrons. So the nice thing about chemistry that I like is that we can give and take electrons. So an atom can give up its electrons, it can take on electrons. It can combine with other elements on the periodic table. Again, giving up, sharing, exchanging electrons. And that's really the chemistry of life, is that most processes that are going on inside of plants and animals is an exchange of electrons. So when we're talking about photosynthesis, we're taking the elements or the energy from the sun, it's exciting electrons, and the electrons are then used and stored as carbohydrates, right? And when we break down food, we're breaking it down, and again, we're releasing these electrons. The electrons then are able to do work. So that's the energy where we're going. So if I'm an atom and I give away all my electrons, I'm going to have a net positive charge. I've given away all the negative charges. Because remember, protons are pluses, neutrons are negative, and the neutrons have no charge. Protons tend to be positive. They're balanced in the nucleus, but the electrons are those negative charges on the outside. If I gave away all of those negative charges, I'd have a net positive charge. So I would be considered a cation. And when I'm teaching master gardeners and other groups, I tend to remind them that a cation has a T in it, and that's how I personally remember that it's a positive. I've also been doing this for a while, so I tend to remember that cations are positive, but if it's been a while and you're like, how do I remember the difference? Cations have a T, it's a positive. However, if I'm an atom and I take on negative charges, so this ion, this cation gave away its negative charge, the anion accepted it, now it's going to have a net negative charge, it's going to be called an anion. Okay, so far so good. Basic chemistry review. Hopefully, I'm not going to make you memorize the periodic table. That's coming later. No, just kidding. But moving on. Why do I bring this up? Because there's this really cool property of soils called cation exchange capacity. Now, if you were in a soil chemistry class, we would go into all the detail on why the outside of a soil particle tends to have a negative charge. But you can trust me that soil particles, the outside of the soil particle carries a net negative charge. So I like to imagine this to a balloon. All right, so when you rub the balloon and you get the static electricity, you can stick it on the wall. It's kind of like that. So pluses and minuses attract one another. So if the outside of the soil particle is negative, it's going to logically attract positive cations. So here's what a lot of people misinterpret when they're talking about nutrients in the soil, and we're talking about fertilization and care of palms in the landscape. that all the nutrients that a palm or a plant needs to take up are dissolved in the water in the soil. So in the water around this soil particle, we have potassium, we have calcium, we have magnesium, we have nitrates, we have phosphates. All the elements that a plant needs to grow are in the water. Now, if we had a rain event and we weren't holding any of these elements in the water, the rain event would wash these out to the groundwater. The nice thing about cation exchange capacity is that if the outside of the soil particle is negative, it can actually hold some of those cations against that flushing of the nutrients when you have a rain event. So my soil can physically hold one negative site can hold 1 potassium. 2 negative sites can hold 1 calcium. 2 negative sites can hold 1 magnesium. So the cation exchange capacity means that I can hold these nutrients and keep them on the soil particle so they're not loose in the soil water, but when a plant needs it, it will release it and then the plant can take it up. So it's kind of like I'm holding on. So I have a teenager who loves to give me everything to hold on to, like hold my phone, mom, until she's like, oh, give me back my phone. So I'm kind of like the negative cation. I'm holding her phone until she decides she needs it, then she takes it back from me. Unlike poor nitrate and phosphate, so you notice they carry a negative charge. Well, those are anions. So we don't really tend to hold anions on the soil particles, so they tend to be in the soil water. And if you have a rain event, you will see nitrate and phosphates moving through the soil profile and into the groundwater, or running off into ponds and other bodies of water. So when we're talking about, proper fertilization and management, nitrate and phosphate tend to get a really bad rap because people are going, oh, they're the pollutants. We've gotten really good about how we fertilize and manage our landscape. So I don't believe that's as big a problem anymore, but I wanted you to understand why people can look at that and they're going, oh, the science behind it. So just keep that in mind, because we'll come back to that when we talk a little bit about blackout and fertilizer regulations and things like that. Okay, here's the rub. Not all soils have the same cation exchange capacity. So we tend to have soils that are fairly heavy on the sand, right? Sandy loams, depending on where you're at in the state. Here in South Florida, I think we're called a Margate fine sand. So it's a sandy loam, little bit of organic matter. But throughout the state of Florida, we tend to be somewhere towards the low end of cation exchange capacity. This equivalent 2 milliequivalents per 100 grams. That's how we measure cation exchange capacity. And this is for pure sand. So we don't have pure sand. We do have some organic matter. We do have some loam, some silt and things like that. So we don't tend to be quite this low. But if we're talking about a clay soil, like in the Midwest, well, our cation exchange capacity is quite a bit larger. It's 25 to 100 milliequivalents per 100 grams. Organic matter by far has the highest cation exchange capacity, up to 250 to 400 milliequivalents per 100 grams. So soils that have more clay organic matter are going to hold a lot more cations. Again, we're holding it so that when there's a rain event, we're holding it so that when the plant needs it, we'll give it up and it can be released into the soil water so the plant can take it up. But in most cases, we're holding on to it until it's needed. So since Tom mentioned that I work a lot in the greenhouse, so greenhouse media tend to be very heavy on organic matter, a lot of peat and things like that. So we tend to have a very high cation exchange capacity in greenhouse medias versus in natural soils. Depending on where you're at and the composition of your soil, you can be anywhere from this end of from a low end to a little higher end on the spectrum. So knowing our soil has somewhat low cation exchange capacity, that tells me that probably in the state of Florida, I'm not holding on to a lot of nutrients. So that also suggests that because I know I'm not holding on to a lot of nutrients, I'm going to want to make sure that I am aware of that and I'm fertilizing appropriately, following the recommendations and the guidelines and following best management practices. We want to make sure that we address this, not that we are going to fix it. Everybody keeps going, oh, well, I want to fix it. I want to fix this low cation exchange capacity. Well, we can't really fix it because soils are highly buffered systems. So that means is that whatever you do will have a temporary change, but it's not permanent. Okay, so you're going to have to continuously monitor this. So this is where, again, plant selection, plant placement, proper fertilization, proper use of mulch, things like all of this comes into play because we're learning that we're down here. We can't change it, but we're going to find ways to grow with it, to use it to our best advantage. So that's number one. We have a low cation exchange capacity. I haven't even showed you the palms yet. We're still doing soils. Number two, soil pH. So soil pH is really important, again, because it has a lot to do with what nutrients are available or not available. So ideally, we'd like a pH between 6.5 and 7. That would be perfect because what it means is that the widest part of the band is where these nutrients are available in the soil so that the plant can take it up for growth. So we're going to get to the elements, but there are 17 essential elements that all plants need to grow. And when the pH is in the middle between 6.5 and 7, then the nutrients are in a form that the plant can take up. So if you say, okay, so if I have a soil with a high cation exchange capacity, means I'm holding the nutrients, plus my pH is around 7, that means they're in a form the plant can take up. That's the ideal situation. Now, we know as gardeners, as people who manage and take care of plants, who advise people on plants, that that our soils are not ideal. All right, our pH of our soil, I should say in South Florida, I run I'm 7.6. I'm probably a little, depending on the day or where I take the sample, I could get up to 8. So I know probably okay on nitrogen and phosphorus. Now this band should not be this thick. I know potassium is deficient. I have lots of calcium. I know magnesium is deficient. I know iron and manganese are deficient, and so is boron. So I know, okay, I have a low cation exchange capacity. I tend to have a slightly higher pH. I might be missing potassium. I might be missing magnesium, iron, manganese, and boron. Okay, well, let's see if this is true. Let's look at a soil report. So this is for the research center at Fort Lauderdale, and A&L Laboratories is no longer in business, but when they were here, I used to send, they would do soil reports for me. So they told me that my organic matter is 3.8%. That's pretty low. You know, it's better than what I would expect. So I would guess, depending on where you're at in Florida, it can be anywhere from 2 to 8%. So we don't have a lot of organic matter. And again, it's going to be limited to probably, you know, the first few layers of soil. Looking through here, it tells me that this is my estimated nitrogen release. So I have a lot of nitrogen. My phosphorus is okay. My potassium is very low. My magnesium is low. My calcium is very high. My soil pH, they consider 7.6 very high. So here's my cation exchange capacity. So it's telling me that it's 14.2. Remember, I said the sand was at 2. Clay soils tend to be a little higher, like 25 to 100. So I'm low, but I'm not a clay soil. So I was looking at this when I was preparing the talk, and I thought, well, it tells me what percentage. So I know of this 14 milliequivalents per 100 grams, 94% of it of those sites are filled with calcium. So think about that. So I don't have a lot of cation sites, right? So you think, okay, well, let's say you had 14 sites. That's not what this number means, but picture in mind, you have 14 sites on the soil particle. 94% of them are filled with calcium. 5% of them are going to be filled with magnesium, and less than 1% is going to be filled with potassium. Huh. And there's no hydrogen or sodium on those sites. So of those 14 sites, most of them have calcium on them with a few magnesium stuck in and very, very little potassium. But I also told you we have a high pH, right? So they're saying very high on this slide. So it's very high. So at very high, so that means potassium isn't available. So I know potassium is not going to be available. I know that magnesium is not going to be available. Okay. I also know that I'm going to be missing probably iron and manganese. And then I'm going, oh, wow. I have most of the sites, I'm not even holding it in the soil. So I'm going to lose potassium even if it is available. So there might be a little bit available, but I'm going to lose it because I can't hold it in my soil, and I can't hold magnesium because calcium's hogging all the sites. So I find this very telling why we see certain nutrient deficiencies in palms over and over and over again. And I see the same deficiencies as I've traveled to the Caribbean. They have similar soils. So in Bahamas, same problems with palms, same nutrient problems with palms. In Barbados and other places, same nutrient problem. In fact, I was in Barbados giving a talk several years ago, and I was drinking my coffee, and I looked across the pool patio, and I'm like, look at that, that's potassium deficiency. And my friend goes, yes, it is. I said, even sitting here drinking coffee in this beautiful tropical environment, all I see is potassium deficiency. So now I'm learning why. So now this is a tool that you need to know. You go, okay, do you have to have a soil report to prove this? Probably not, but I'm using the soil report to prove it to you that it's because of our cation exchange capacity, it's because of our soil pH that we're seeing certain nutrient deficiencies over and over again. So a nutrient deficiency, what that means is that the plant's really not going to grow very well. So when the nutrient is deficient, you'll see stunted growth, sometimes of the roots, sometimes of the stems, sometimes of the leaves. You'll see yellowing. So you'll see yellow leaves, you'll see necrosis, which is browning of leaves. And in this case, again, this is potassium deficiency on a coconut palm. So you can see the yellow and then the brown. And I've talked to some master gardeners about this and showed them nutrient deficiencies. And they're always like, well, how do I make it green? Well, you can't make yellow tissue green again, and you don't make brown tissue is dead tissue. So dead is dead. It's not going to be green again. So you're not going to make this frond perfectly green and beautiful again. And once you see this symptoms on a palm, it takes 2 to 3 years to correct this problem. And that's with continued maintenance fertilization to correct for what you're seeing. So by the time you see this, the deficiency is already there. Is it going to kill the tree? Probably not. Is a tree going to always look kind of yellow? Probably. Again, 2 to 3 years to fix a problem once you see it like this. So, and realize that this yellowing and necrosis, it's going to vary with the function of the element and whether or not that element is a mobile nutrient within the plant. So a lot of times you'll get a picture, and you really need to understand before you can diagnose the problem. Is it on the older leaves or is it on the newer growth? Because if it's on the older leaves, it probably is one of 2 nutrients. And if it's on the newer leaves, it's probably a different element or nutrient that's deficient. So let me explain what this mobile means. And then we'll talk about the different nutrients. So mobile versus immobile. So if I'm a mobile nutrient, so the most important thing you have to remember is that in palms and in most plants, the most important part of the plant is the growing tip. That's where all the activity is going on. And we know when we're caring for palms, we don't want to over prune a palm because it could damage the apical meristem. Palms have that one apical meristem. If you remove the apical meristem, the palm dies. That's why that's why lethal bronzing is so detrimental, is because it actually attacks the meristem, the apical meristem, and is killing the plant from that point. So if that's the most important point on the plant, because that's the point where everything is growing and keeps going from there. If that's the most, so I'm pointing out that this is in my picture is what I'm calling the apical meristem. So if I'm a mobile nutrient, I'm down here in these leaves, and I know the apical meristem needs me. I'm going to move from this leaf, from the lower leaves, and go to the growing point to support it. So if I've left this lower leaves, I'm going to see the nutrient deficiency on the lower leaves, the older leaves, because those nutrients have left the older leaves and gone to the growing tip to support growth. So potassium and magnesium are mobile nutrients that are going to leave the lower leaves and move to the growing point. So you will see the deficiency symptoms on the old leaves, not the new leaves. Because again, potassium goes up, growing point is missing potassium. I'm out here in the older leaves. I'm going to move to the growing point. This is also another reason why when Dr. Brochot was doing a lot of his research before he retired, he suggested leaving the older fronds on the leaves until they were just about ready to fall off, because there's still nutrients in those leaves. So if we don't have it in the soil and it's not on, so let's say it's potassium. We don't have a lot of potassium in the soil, or the potassium in the soil isn't available or in the form that the plant can take up. We know that the cation exchange sites are loaded with calcium, so potassium's just sitting out there. So we don't have a lot of potassium in the soil, but there's still some left in the older leaves. It'll leave those leaves off so that the nutrients can move, because they're mobile, to the growing point to support growth. So that's why a lot of times, even though people want to remove those older leaves, like we saw on the last slide with the potassium, I mean, it'd be great to say, yep, let's remove these old leaves from this coconut palm, but there's still nutrients in here. Even though it's deficient, there's still some nutrients in here that can grow and support the growing point, the apical meristem. Now, if I'm immobile, and there are a couple of nutrients that are immobile, they're not going to move. So our micronutrients like boron, iron, and manganese are immobile. So what's going to happen is that the growing point is short on iron, and there's iron in these older leaves, but it's not going to move. It's kind of like my husband being on the weekend stuck on the couch. He's not getting up for anything while the game's on. Until the game, he's not going anywhere. So he's not going to move. And thank goodness he's not watching this, because he'd be really mad. But iron. So iron sitting out here in the leaves, it's not going to go and move to the growing tip. So where you're going to see the nutrient deficiencies, it's going to be up here in the new growth. So that's why when we talk about boron deficiency, manganese deficiency, iron deficiency in palms, you're going to see the deficiencies showing up on the new growth, not the old growth. So it's going to be on the growing, it's going to be around the growing point. That's where you're going to see the nutrient deficiencies. So just to refresh your memory, so there are a couple of nutrients that I've been talking about, and I've kind of been throwing out, and we're gonna repeat them on the next slide. But it's really interesting when we're talking about plant nutrition. And I told you the periodic table is going to come back to haunt us later in the lecture. Here's the periodic table. But on this periodic table, there are 17 elements that plants must have, all plants, whether you're a palm, whether you're in a greenhouse, you're in the soil, you know, a hibiscus, all plants need these 17 elements to grow. And the reason we know this is that there's 3 criteria of essentiality. If you don't give the plant that nutrient, the plant will eventually die. So like I said, if you don't give the plant potassium, it's going to die. Now, is there enough potassium in the environment to support our palms? Yes. Is there enough to make them look great and lush? No. So we're going to have to supplement. The deficiency can only be corrected by supplying the element that's missing. So if I'm missing potassium in my palms and I'm showing a potassium deficiency, then if I give the plant nitrogen, I'm not improving the deficiency because I haven't given it what it's missing. I've given it nitrogen, but it really needed potassium. Again, kind of a foreshadowing towards when we talk about fertilization. Nitrogen's not a bad element. It's just that if I'm missing potassium, I have to be very careful about what other elements might be in the fertilizer, especially if this is the one that I'm missing. And then this element, all these elements have a specific role inside the plant. They do something specific inside the plant. So the elements are carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen are the first 3. We have nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. First 3 letters on most fertilizer bags, N, P, and K. We have calcium and magnesium and sulfur. Those are our macronutrients needed in large quantities. Then we have iron, manganese, copper, boron, zinc, molybdenum, and chloride and nickel are the micronutrients needed in smaller quantities. In general, when we're talking about mobile versus immobile, the macronutrients, carbon, or nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, tend to be mobile or more mobile than our micronutrients like iron, manganese, copper, boron, zinc, things like that. Okay, so again, this is hopefully a review, something that you go, yeah, okay, I kind of remember learning this. Oh, yeah. I do remember macro, micro, large quantities, small quantities. Okay. So, and when we're talking about fertilization programs, what we're trying to do is we know that if we don't give them certain, if we know that if there's certain nutrients missing in the soil, so we've already looked at our soil, we know we have a certain cation exchange capacity. We know that we have a specific pH. I've also told you that our soils are highly buffered. So it's really hard to go out there and change the pH of the soil because it's going to go back to normal, if you want to say. It's really hard to change the cation exchange capacity. Again, it's going to go back to normal. So if I know I'm missing certain nutrients and I know that I need these nutrients to complete the life cycle, and the only way to fix the problem is to give it what it needs, then we're talking about a very specific targeted type of fertilization program that's specific for what palms need in South Florida, or in South Florida where I'm at, but throughout Florida, what they need specifically to improve their growth. Okay, so let's begin with the most common nutrient problems that I have seen on palms since I have been in Florida. And it doesn't matter where I go in Florida, by far, the most common nutrient deficiency I see on palms in Florida is potassium deficiency. And I'm going to read the definition of what potassium deficiency is. It is translucent. So like you see here, this is potassium deficiency. Translucent yellow-orange spotting on the older leaves. So they kind of be yellow. They kind of have these translucent spots. They might have marginal and tip necrosis. So we start to see these spots. And if we were to looking up into the light, you would see, you could look through, you kind of like see through it. We're going to get edge tip burning, or it looks like burning. It's necrosis, the browning, and then lots of little brown spots. very classic potassium deficiency. So the next most common deficiency, so that's by far the most common. When in doubt, it's probably potassium. And especially it's going to be on the older leaves because potassium is a mobile nutrient. So you're going to find it the lower leaves, and you can look across a field. And if you see lower leaves that are yellow, chances are it's probably potassium. Might not be, it might be magnesium. Magnesium, though, tends to be a little more specific. It's more common on phoenix palms. So any of the phoenix palms, you'll tend to see more magnesium deficiency. And I have pictures, I'm going to get there. Then the next one you'll probably see is manganese. And then we'll see boron. And every now and then you'll see iron. So by far, these are the most common nutrient deficiencies on palms in the landscape. So you notice I didn't say nitrogen or phosphorus. So that might give you a little hint as we start going towards fertilization. But again, by far the most common nutrient deficiency problems, and that means it's missing, are potassium, number one. Then magnesium, manganese, boron, and iron. So let's look at what potassium deficiency looks like. And each palm's going to look a little different, but this is potassium deficiency. So this is, like I said, I see this everywhere. So this is the areca hedge next to my, it's not in my landscape, but it's at the border between my yard and my neighbor's yard. Again, you can kind of see the brown tip. So you see a little bit of browning. You see the brown spots. The blades tend to be yellow, a little translucent. I mean, I look for the yellowing and the spots. I look for all the little brown spots and then the brown on the tips. Here's another one. Again, this is pretty classic. We kind of see the tips and then the brown spotting. Very classic of potassium deficiency. And the coconut palms, almost every coconut palm I've seen tend to be potassium deficiency. What I was looking at in the Starbucks line was potassium deficiency. I think they were on Royals. So, and Christmas palms in Coral Springs, all of them have potassium deficiency. So I tend to see that most. The next one you will see is on the Phoenix, and that's magnesium. And that's a little different. If at first glance you look at this and go, well, that's potassium, but there's a little difference here when we're looking at magnesium. One, I know this is a Phoenix, and I'm looking at this. I don't see the spotting, right? So it's still the lower leaves. So I know this is a mobile nutrient like potassium. But what I'm seeing is that you'll see that it tends to be a little different. So what you'll see is that you'll tend to see this yellowing on the edges and you don't see the spots. And then it tends to be fairly green in the middle. So the next slide is a little bit better. See how the mid is green, right? But the tips are yellow, and then you're getting this yellowing towards the outer edge of the leaf, and the tips are brown, but the middle around this is green. That tells me that this is magnesium. So we kind of get these chlorotic bands. So they're going to be along the margins, it's going to be yellow, but the central portion of the remains green. And that tells me this is magnesium. And I know that it's very common to see magnesium deficiency on Phoenix. I also know that magnesium is easily, like potassium, is readily leached from our soil. And when we have high levels of nitrogen and calcium, it'll tend to make this worse. So we'll tend to see this more often when you, with heavy nitrogen fertilization. Okay. What's the next one look like? Well, the next deficiency is manganese, and manganese is a micronutrient. It's the symbol Mn, and you're going to see that the newest leaves. So again, so Mn. So this is a micronutrient. So it's immobile. So it's going to so the magnesium is going to stay in the older leaves and not go to the growing tip. And what you'll see is that the newest leaves emerge chlorotic with like longitudinal necrotic streaks or kind of like a frizzle appearance. So we've probably seen this. This is frizzle top. And this is funny story with this one. This is in my brother-in-law's yard, and we were sitting in the patio or sitting by the pool, and he looked over and he goes, "What's wrong with my tree?" And I said, "Frizzle top." And he goes, "Oh, what do I need to do?" And I said, "Well, you probably need to get some manganese." And he goes, "No, I fertilize." I'm like, no, not lawn fertilizer, not turf. I go, manganese. And he goes, "Well, can I save this one?" I said, "Well, this one is dead." I said, "But you can save the other two palms next to it." But I go, "This one should have been fertilized a long time ago. It's probably not going to come back." So in severe cases, you will see death of the meristem. And when the meristem dies, you lose the plant. The other one that is will pop up. So this is a boron deficiency. This plant died, but boron deficiency, you don't see it as often, but when you see it, you're going to go, "Oh." Again, boron is a micronutrient and it's immobile. So you're going to see the symptoms on the new growth or on the emerging leaf. And what happens is that boron is easily leached through the soil when you have a lot of rain. So let's say, there might be there's boron in the soil, okay, and the plant's doing just fine. And then all of a sudden we have a lot of rain. It'll wash the boron out. So now we have a temporary deficiency of boron. So the new growth is going to be affected and is going to kind of come out twisted and marled. And what will happen then is that, that new emerging leaf comes out looking a little weird. So this is one I know is boron because it looks just strange. It's kind of twisted and bent in a weird angle. The nice thing about boron deficiency is temporary. It's transient in nature. So after the soil dries out a little bit, the boron levels will come back, and the deficiency the new growth will then come out all right. So it's Dr. Rodenschott has some fascinating photos in his EDIS publication where it shows like you see a boron deficiency and then it gets better and then it looks like this leaf is like almost like you can tell where it was deficient and the growth kind of stopped and was kind of marled and weird looking. Then all of a sudden boron came back and the growth went back, and then it was deficient and then it went back. So it's very strange. It's a very strange nutrient, but it's one that when you see this, realize that, okay, it probably this probably appeared several months, in a time frame after we'd had a lot of rain, and now the soil's so we have the symptom, but now the boron's going to come back, so it will self-correct itself. So it's a temporary deficiency, and it shows up in the new growth. And the last one you don't see a lot of, but you will see it every now and then. And fishtail palms are notorious. You don't see a lot of these palms used in the landscape, but there was one in my neighborhood, and I was able to go and take a picture of it. You're going to see an intraveinal chlorosis. So you're going to see dark veins and then the yellowing in between the veins. That is iron deficiency, and it's going to be on the new leaves, not the old leaves. And sometimes you'll see this on palms when you have poor root respiration or poor soil aeration, and maybe if a palm's been planted too deep. So it's not that iron is deficient in our soils, and we tend to see more iron deficiency on our non-palm ornamentals in our landscape than our palms in the landscape. So it's out there, but by far magnesium and potassium are going to mask just about everything else. And you might see manganese, and you might see boron, and you might see iron. Again, iron is not, I don't see it as often. And I had to really look to find this picture for the presentation today. But again, poor root respiration, poor soil aeration, or when a palm is planted too deep, you might see iron deficiency. But again, I tend to see more iron deficiency on the other ornamentals in my landscape, like hibiscus and ixoras and things like that, than I do on the palms, because by far they're fighting potassium deficiency. So now we're getting down to fertilizing. So remember I said, why do we fertilize? Well, so this is here at the research center. And so this, of course, is our turf research program, but we do have some coconut palms. And I'm standing on the road and I can see the yellowing fronds on a lot of these coconuts and other palms in this little mini palm grove. So chances are, if I were to walk out there, this is potassium deficiency. And if I want to maintain and keep these healthy in the long term, I'm going to need to fertilize. So remember the criteria of essentiality. Its deficiency will prevent it from completing its life cycle. So are these palms dying? No. Could they be healthier? Yes. Would proper fertilization improve their growth? Yes. So what's missing? I'm missing potassium. What's the problem? Well, these plants are near a large field of turf that's being maintained for research purposes, but chances are this has been fertilized with a fertilizer designed for turf grass and turf maintenance, which would be higher in nitrogen because nitrogen improves the turf quality. So probably a lot of nitrogen fertilizer here. And palm roots can extend quite a ways from the base of the palm, so they can be up to 50 feet away or out from the palm. So those roots are underneath turf in most cases. So Dr. Broshot did a lot of work on turf fertilization, and most of my references now are coming from his publications on turf fertilization. Again, because this hasn't been my area of expertise. I'm plant nutrition, but I'm not palm nutrition. I'm subbing. But as I mentioned, and based on his publication, he said that when you see a nutrient problem in a palm, it usually takes 2 to 3 years to correct that problem. He worked very hard on developing a palm special fertilizer. Why? Well, he knew what I just shared with you, that we have soils with low cation exchange capacities and high pH. So he said, well, we need to stimulate the growth. So we don't want to have a fertilizer with no nitrogen unless, and we're going to get there, but if he recommended that a palm special fertilizer has 100% of the nitrogen, potassium, and magnesium in a controlled release form. So that means that the nitrogen, potassium, and magnesium are encapsulated, and as that encapsulation breaks down based on temperature and moisture, it releases the nutrients. And as it releases the nutrients, the palm takes it up and uses it to grow. And what's nice about a controlled release fertilizer is that it's protected. So it's in the soil around the palm. And if you have a rain event, it's not going to be washed away because it's still in its capsule. And it might let a little bit out after the rain and then a little bit more, but there's still fertilizer left. And in general, most of the palm special fertilizers, their release rate, they release their nutrients slowly over a 3-month period, which comes to the recommendation of, and this is straight out of his publication, 1.5 pounds per 100 square feet every 3 months. And the palm special fertilizer has the nutrients of 8 nitrogen, 2 phosphorus, 12 potassium, 4 magnesium. And this has got to be a 3-to-1 ratio of potassium to magnesium. What did I tell you? by far the most common nutrient deficiency is potassium, followed by magnesium. And the nitrogen is there to support general growth and health, and just a little bit of phosphorus. All right, so that's the recommendation. Well, here we go. We live in Florida, and most of us are dealing with summer blackouts. So that means we're not fertilizing between the months of June and September because we're trying to reduce the amount of nitrogen and phosphorus in the landscape to be a potential pollutant. Now, I'm not a politician, and I'm not here to debate whether this is the right thing to do or not. What I do realize is that having a blackout period may not necessarily be the most logical thing, in my opinion, because during the rainy season, our nutrients are being washed away fairly quickly. So, and that's when we need them the most, because that's where we're going to lose them the most. Okay. So, and Dr. Broshot realized that as well. So he did a few studies, and he found that you could use a 0 nitrogen, 0 phosphorus, 12 potassium, 4 magnesium with micronutrients, again, that 3-to-1 ratio, during a summer period to supply the potassium and magnesium that the plants need. And again, that's in 100% controlled release format. So it's the 100% controlled release, and it eliminates the nitrogen and phosphorus and allows you then to provide the nutrients that are probably going to be missing in order to continue that fertilization cycle during what would be a blackout period. And then after that, you would then go back to using an 8 to 12 plus 4 magnesium as the maintenance. So the other times of the year, you would use the 8 to 12, because again, you will need some potassium, nitrogen and phosphorus. It's also interesting that he was showing that if you were in an area where, I'm going from his publications, he did the work that he used the 0-0-12 plus 4 magnesium in an area that had a heavy turf fertilizer. Again, turf fertilizers tend to be higher on the nitrogen, and we don't tend to see a lot of nitrogen deficiency or phosphorus deficiency in Florida. It's there, but it's not the major it's not a major concern when we're growing ornamentals. So he found that if there was an area that had a turf fertilizer that had just let's see, so again, we tend to have mixed landscapes, so we have palms with other shrubs and ornamentals, and usually if turf is used, it's used wisely, or it's in smaller areas. So if the turf had been fertilized with nitrogen fertilizer, then you could go back and apply this, which has no nitrogen, no phosphorus, but had the potassium and magnesium that probably wasn't as high in the turf fertilizer, to supplement the palms and to improve palm growth. Okay. So, and again, same rate of 1.5 pounds per 100 square feet. So again, this was not my research. This was Dr. Broshot's research. I am happy to announce, though, that we have Dr. Broshot retired almost 2 years ago, and Dr. Elliott. We have now been able to hire a palm horticulturist here at Fort Lauderdale who starts April 2nd. So Palm School will be coming back, and that means that we're going to have new research and continue this research on the nutrients, as well as palm fungal diseases, as well as the palm phytoplasmas and viruses. So Palm School is coming back. But with that, I am at the end of my presentation. Again, hopefully I've explained some of the nutrition and some of the nutrients and things that are going on. And if there are other questions, I'll be glad to help. But again, I'm sharing what I know about plant nutrition And I will do my very best to answer palm questions as well.
Kim, thank you so very much. That you covered a lot of stuff. You brought back a lot of my old school thoughts. And back when I was in college, it was only 16 nutrients. I know now it's up to 17 essential nutrients. So I'm showing my age, unfortunately. But I do have some questions that have come up, and so we'll start first with. You answered one of them, by the way. The very early question was, is potassium the most common deficiency? Obviously.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, you answered that very well. Is it possible to explain why certain elements have irregular availability curves? Phosphorus, for instance, becomes less available at pH 8 to 8.5, but suddenly becomes available at a pH of 9.
It has a lot to do with the chemistry. So what they combine with. So when you have the different pHs, it actually what happens is we change how the it's back to that periodic table and how electrons come and go at different pHs. So everything in nature has a pH optimum, and when we change the pH, we change how that atom reacts with other elements, and so that's why certain the availability changes with different pHs, because it's changing the electrons in the outer orbit, and whether it's going to bond with one oxygen or two oxygens, or how it's going to bond and react, is why we see the differences in availability.
Okay, great. What do you recommend when installing new plant material? Amending or replacing the soil? And with what? Topsoil mix, or surface sand, etc.? What are your thoughts?
That's a really good question. So, and I know that I'm trying to remember all my FFL guidelines and all that, because I don't want to say anything wrong. There are so many different thoughts about that. So Dr. Barsha and I actually did a study where we tried amending when we were planting palms, and then we tried not amending, and there really wasn't a difference. We also tried placing fertilizer in the hole versus putting fertilizer on top. And basically, we found that if you were fertilizing at transplanting the palms, it helped because they were growing out of that root ball that they were in, especially if they're in a container media. They had to grow out of that, and then you start seeing the problems. So we wanted to make sure that we were fertilizing within the first couple of months, but it didn't really matter if it was in the hole or on the top. The nutrients were still getting there, and again, we were using the Palm Special, but we started right away. I think we started with a lower rate, and I'd have to go back to find the research to remember exactly how much, but there wasn't really a whole lot of benefit to amending when we were planting. But again, some people say amend, so I don't want to. There are some people who say it works and other people who say it doesn't. So.
All right. If you correct a boron deficiency once on a royal palm, is it susceptible to boron deficiency in the future?
Probably, because boron is easily leached out of the soil, so you will probably see it again. So it will come back. Again, it depends on how much rain. I mean, you'd have to look at how much rain and how much water fell before you saw, and how long it was before you saw the deficiency, and then you'd want to go back and go, okay, I've corrected it, things are going well, but it's a temporary fix, so it's going to come and go.
Okay. Can you overtreat with a nutrient application?
Yes, you can definitely overtreat. Absolutely. The label is the law, and always, yeah, you can definitely overtreat. And what will happen is when you overtreat, you'll actually end up, you'll see it, it'll look like a burn because you've changed the water movement in the soil. So what you'll have is that you have to find a way to do, it's like all those salts in the fertilizer, you have to find a way to dilute it. You're going to pull the water out of the plant in order to dilute the salts in the soil. So you're going to end up burning the plant. So yes, it's very easy to over fertilize, overtreat, and then again, if you over fertilize, then it's just sitting there in the environment. It's a waste, and it's a potential pollutant. So never want to over fertilize. follow the label.
Okay. This person has a majestic palm, and at the base of the tree, the bark is peeling out like a skirt on one side of the tree. Any idea what might be causing that?
It's hard to say. Sometimes palms will do that. I've seen it like if a sprinkler's close to that side, I'm not sure, but sometimes sprinklers can do that and can like if it's hitting, sometimes that can happen. So I don't know.
Yeah, it might be good to have somebody take a look at that.
Yeah.
Contact your local extension agent. Maybe they can take a look and give you a better idea, or at least bring them an image of it so they can go from there. Are you familiar with the ArborJet system? This person's been using this as a means of spoon feeding 400 coconut palms and seeing good results. What are your thoughts on injection fertilization?
I have not seen that program, and I don't have any experience with injection fertilization. My concern with injecting anything into palms is then we're also opening the palm for potential pathogens. So it's a fine balance when we're talking about nutrition on the palms, and then balancing what we're seeing with I know we're injecting some palms with antibiotics to help with lethal bronzing. Doesn't cure lethal bronzing, but it's slowing the symptoms down. And we're looking also at Ganoderma and other things. So I really don't have any expertise on that. It's nice to hear that it's working with the coconuts, but not something that I have expertise in.
Okay, great. If you fertilize your turf, should you also fertilize your palm trees?
Absolutely. Well, and it's funny, Dr. Broshot recommended, and it's expensive, but if you can afford to fertilize your lawn with Palm Special, fertilize your lawn with Palm Special, because you'll make your ornamentals, your palms healthier, and the nitrogen in the Palm Special is enough to support your turf grass. So, but it's Palm Special is not a cheap fertilizer. So, and I acknowledge that.
Could the capsules travel in stormwater runoff?
Capsules, I'm not sure.
I think the fertilizer, the encapsulated fertilizer.
It depends. You want to place it properly around in the vicinity of the canopy of the palm tree. The capsules don't tend to move. I don't tend to see them float away. If you find that your mulch is floating away, then your fertilizer will probably float away. But otherwise, if it's properly placed and it's within the soil, I haven't seen it float away or move into the stormwater runoff.
Okay. Which deficiencies are more common in lower pH soils like old scrub habitat?
Lower pH soils. You might see phosphorus. Trying to think what's you'll have a lot of iron. I have iron. You'll have a lot of iron. That's why and a blueberry is like a lower pH because they need a lot of iron. So you'll have a lot of iron when you don't have it at a low pH, but not at a high pH. At a low pH, you'll probably see more phosphorus. I've seen more phosphorus deficiencies, I've been here in Florida for so long. I've dealt with high pH. I haven't thought about low pH deficiencies in a long time. Sorry about that.
Especially in more urbanized areas, you tend to not see the low pH soils.
Yeah.
So for summer, should we use K-Mag or a 0020 product?
Well, you want to use, yes, if you're allowed to use that in the summer, K-Mag would be good. Again, you want to make sure that your potassium to magnesium, you want to make sure you're not just putting potassium on because you will make magnesium deficiency. So you want like a 3-to-1. So I check the label to make sure that if you're using something with a 20K, that you've got some magnesium in there as well.
Very good. What was the list of nutrients again that generally exhibit in older leaves?
Older leaves, you're going to see potassium, and magnesium.
Wonderful. See, you're so good at this.
Plant nutrition I get. Palms I'm a little iffy on. I'm learning my palms really quick. We haven't had a palm horticulturist here for 2 years, so I've been feeling the questions and I can't wait for someone to be here to answer those questions.
Once a palm has a potassium deficiency and takes 2 to 3 years to correct, how should a granular 0020 or similar should be applied over the next 2 to 3 years?
Yes. Well, let's put it this way. Palms, in my opinion, are going to need continuous fertilization. That is to have them looking their best. It is every 3 to 4 months, you should be fertilizing your palms. And if you have a summer blackout, then look for something without nitrogen and phosphorus so that you continue to give them the potassium and magnesium, because the deficiencies, even after you get it corrected, if you stop fertilizing, they're going to come right back.
All right, I think I might have missed it, but there was a suggested cation exchange capacity for optimal bioavailability in the presented A&L report. It was around 14 in the report.
That wasn't optimal. That was just what they measured it for me.
Great, but there wasn't one suggested, an optimal. Okay, good. Any suggestions on palms that are planted in excavated lime rock with only an inch of sod on top of that?
Why did you put palms in that spot is what I want to know. Actually, you probably didn't have a choice. Someone else decided it for you. Again, with palms, so you want to make sure that you're fertilizing, that you are watering properly, and just monitoring their growth and their development. That's an awful situation for the palms. So I imagine you will see nutrient deficiencies and other issues. So continue, I'm glad that there's at least a little sod around it. That should hopefully your mulching mower and adding organic matter and get it on a regular fertilization program to improve its growth.
Okay. Any suggestions where people can find palm special fertilizer?
I've had that asked, and there are people, I don't know what happened during the blackout or during the lockdown with COVID, but I've had more people asking me where to get palm special fertilizer, and I think we need to start asking Lesco to start making it again. I don't know. If we start asking, it'll start being produced, but I've had people ask me where to get it and they can't find it. And so I agree. And I don't know why, but I guess they're just, people stopped fertilizing and stopped doing that during COVID and they stopped making it. So now we have to start asking for it.
All right. Another issue because of COVID. Goodness.
That would be my best guess, because it was everywhere before, last year ago, and now people are going, I can't find it, I can't get it. Especially for whatever reason, on the west coast of Florida, they have been having a really hard time finding it. So I don't know why.
Okay. What about using foliar applications to correct some of these micronutrient deficiencies?
Again, it's kind of like when we're talking about injecting palms. Foliar nutrients, from my experience, and especially, well, one, you'd have to get up in the canopy, and two, what happens in most cases is that we overspray and the leaves start, so we overspray with the foliar nutrients and then the leaves drip down, it hits the soil and the roots take it up. So I haven't seen, a small percentage of nutrients are taken up by the leaves, but I'm not a big believer in foliar nutrient sprays. Just because people tend to spray to overspray, and then it drips on the soil and the roots take them up anyway.
Okay. How much does the quality of irrigation water affect palm health and the ability of the soil to hold on to positively charged ions?
Soil water quality, I haven't seen it. It's not necessarily an issue. I mean, of course, if we're talking about salt water and saltwater intrusion, we're talking about sodium. Sodium is going to kind of mess with potassium uptake, so it could make it worse, and we might see some salt damage. I haven't seen any issues from wastewater use on palms in the landscape, although we haven't done a ton of research on it. I've been doing most of my wastewater work has been in the greenhouse, but that's an interesting question. I don't think it's going to really change the cation exchange capacity of the positive ions. What it will do is it will change sodium and potassium. So the element of concern in most poor water quality is sodium. So sodium and potassium, they both are a 1+ charge, and they will tend to compete with one another for uptake. So we want to make sure that we try to balance that with potassium.
Okay, here's an interesting question. Are there any palms that you're aware of that have lower nutrient requirements?
Lower nutrient requirements.
You know, in other words, would have fewer deficiencies in our lousy soils.
Have the native palms probably, but that would be, yeah, native palms. But I've also found that the native palm, everybody wants something else other than the native palms. So yeah, I don't know anything per se.
Any idea what the pH of the soil in the palm fertilizer test sites you mentioned with Dr. Brochat?
The pH, all of that was done here at the center. So the pH of our soil would have been like that, what I showed on the report, probably 7.6 to 7.8, 7.8 up to 8. I don't think we've ever gotten at 8. I think we've been like 7.6 to 7.8, and at pretty standard here at the center. And that's where all of the work would have been done.
Okay, I'm getting a lot of super positive feedback, by the way. People enjoyed it. Here's if you could just cover one more time the application rate of the 8212 fertilizer. It was calculated at,
I think it was 1.5, let me say 1.5 pounds per 1.5 pounds per 100 square feet.
Wonderful. This presentation will be made available on the GIVMP website, like all of our monthly webinars. So, if you've missed something, you can certainly catch up there. Let's see. Here's a question about injecting nutrients. I guess the fertilizer injection was injected into the roots, not the trunk itself.
Yeah, again, it's not something I've done, so I don't really feel comfortable addressing it because I haven't tried it.
All right, I'm just trying to see if I'm missing some things. Let's see. Any thoughts on nutritional spikes that are placed in the soil?
Yeah, some people, again, I don't know if Dr. Brochat did the work with spikes. It was more of a broad. The problem with the spike is you have to place it where those roots are, and the roots are going out from the base of the palm, and they could be 50 feet away from the base of the palm. A spike, you'd have to place it precisely there. I mean, spikes are great if you're talking about container production, but not in a landscape. A broadcast fertilizer would be much better. You're going to have it covering the area. The nutrients are then going to get to the tips where they're taken up. So yeah, spikes are okay, but again, you want that 100% controlled release, nitrogen, potassium, magnesium, and
Tom McCubbin, when I used to work with Tom McCubbin, he used to use the analogy with spikes. It's like feeding every other child at the table.
There you go. I like that.
How are you going to decide which kids get the nutrients? I prefer a broadcast type product, but is there an organic solution for fertilization, like adding compost or plant materials?
You know, it's funny that someone says that. So I gave this same, I was talking about palm nutrition in the Caribbean, and I was mentioning that potassium, you know, actually the K2O is potash, and they're all going potash. So you mean I can go dump ashes on all the coconut palms? And I said, well, you could. So they're all running out to get ashes out of their fireplace to put around all the coconut palms on the island. I'm like, okay, that's not quite what I meant, but yeah, there are organic solutions. Blood meal is an organic source of potassium. Potash is an organic source of potassium. However, Epsom salts are magnesium sulfate, so that's an option. The problem with a lot of these organic solutions is that you're not sure how much is available and when it's going to be available, because organic matter has to break down slowly over time to release the nutrients. So I love compost. I've worked with compost. I'm a proponent for making compost, but each compost varies a little bit, and you're not sure, is it going to release nitrogen now? Is it going to release phosphorus? Is it going to release potassium? Whereas our palm special fertilizer is controlled to release potassium at this rate over time. Whereas compost, you might get a little bit and then nothing, and then a little bit. So it's like feeding every other child again. Whereas this controlled release is going to say it continuously releases potassium over 3 months, and everybody gets it. So I don't dislike compost or organic solutions, and I think they're perfectly acceptable. But for the long-term health and well-being of the palm landscape, you're going to want to actually use the palm special fertilizer or a commercially made fertilizer.
Okay. A lot of people in the chat are talking about that you can find the palm special at some of the site ones.
Oh, good. Okay.
They've got a network around the state.
Yeah, and you know what? I know they're starting to make it, because I had some growers call me about it, and I said you just have to start asking for it. So I think it's coming back, but for a while there, it was hard to find.
Okay. You know, down in South Florida, it's a little different situation than through the rest of the state as far as uptake of nutrients. You've got it. They're growing year round, and so they're taking up nutrients pretty much year round. What about in other parts of the state? Are there times like during the winter that we would want to avoid fertilization?
That's a really good point. And it's funny because I think about seasons, even here in South Florida, you can see the changes in our season. It's very subtle in South Florida versus the rest of the state. But I can see that things will slow down in the wintertime. And so I recommend, again, you can cut back on the water, the fertilization in the wintertime. And I would say that even though it looks like things have slowed down in the wintertime and that the palms aren't taking up nutrients, I would imagine that there still are, that when there's rain, that they're still taking up the nutrients. So I haven't seen that you would want to change fertilization. I wouldn't want to stop fertilization in the wintertime, because I know the palms are still growing. They're just not as active and flush, and you're not seeing a ton of new growth. But you could cut back and definitely slow down. And that's where, like I said, that summer blackout, when all that rain and everything's lush and growing, you're like, whoa. So some people are saying, well, load it up in the wintertime. Well, again, if the plant's not taking up, it's just sitting in the soil. So that's where, again, a controlled release fertilizer, it's letting it out a little bit at a time. So the little bit that it might, so I would say that the nutrient uptake slows a little bit in the wintertime, but they're still taking up nutrients. So it's still okay to fertilize, but you could probably go with a little less. But I haven't done enough of the research to tell you how much less.
Well, and that'll be something that our new Palm faculty member will be able to answer.
I'm making notes so she'll know what to do.
You mentioned leaving yellow or older fronds on because they have nutrients to offer the newer growth. If the palm is on a fertilizer program, can enough nutrients be added to allow trimming of the yellow fronds?
Yeah, I mean, again, it for aesthetic reasons. I know some people are dealing with HOAs and other things. So for aesthetic reasons, yes. For safety reasons, yes. I just know that in the past, even with some of the stuff that we were doing with fertilization, there was still some value in leaving those fronds on. So even though you're fertilizing, there's still some nutrients in those fronds to move and support the growing tips. So it's a personal, it's a kind of a call there. Like if you can leave it on, leave them on until the very last minute. But if it's going to cause harm or detriment or aesthetically, then of course, as long as you're fertilizing, you could remove the fronds.
All right, just a couple more, and then I'll haul off the dogs. You've been awesome answering all of these questions. Is there any correcting the extreme boron and extreme boron deficiency? We have a royal palm that showed initial signs, and we've corrected it over the past few years. But this past year, we had an extreme reaction where the head is almost leaning horizontally.
Wow. Okay. Okay. So I don't know. I mean, Dr. Broshop was the one who taught me about the boron deficiency. And I know it is transient and seasonal. I didn't know it could get that extreme. And I would venture to guess that there's probably after some major rain event, or I imagine it probably showed up if it was after some of the tropical storms or hurricanes we had, some of the rain events we had this summer. I could imagine that you would see whatever you corrected going away. So depending on where you're at, I could definitely see where the boron would have been leached, because we did have, some very wet storms this year. So I don't have a good answer for that, other than the boron should come back, and I don't know. Stock is always going to correct itself, so it's going to take a while until the boron is back in the soil, and then the next set of growth should come out looking all right. But yeah, that's very interesting. I'd love to see a picture of it, by the way. That'd be kind of cool.
All right, one last question. What do you think about using Epsom salts in the summer on palms?
Epsom salts. Well, again, Epsom salts, you dissolve them in the water, but the challenge is that the minute it rains, they're going to be gone. They're not going to be held in the soil. Whereas if you use a controlled release source of magnesium, it will be there and held, and even if you have a rain event, it won't wash away.
Fantastic. Kim, thank you so much for taking the time this morning. Again, look through the chat box. There's huge round of applause and a lot of thank yous for taking a complex concept and something that is so detrimental to our plants throughout the state, and bringing it down and making it easy to understand. So really appreciate it. And, hopefully everybody will tune in and let their friends know to tune into the webinar once it's posted on the website. Usually takes about 1 to 2 weeks, and it should be posted. So Kim, thank you.
Right. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Thank you.
Have a great day.
Bye.